Welcome to set up, you guys. Checking the sound. All right, good. We have sound. Good morning, you guys. Still playing with, studio setup and all of that. But you guys, I am happy with how everything is going. Still playing around. We're not quite finished, but we're getting there. Thank you so much for your patience with me. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time, my name is Natasha, and I'm actually really excited about what I saw in my study today. Okay. If you haven't been with me and this is your first time, let me just give you a little bit of context. I'm studying the ministry of Jesus. I'm using a harmony of the Gospels plan, which puts all the Gospels side by side in chronological order. So what that helps me to do is if ever there's an account that's told by multiple of the Gospels, when I say Gospels, I'm talking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is the ministry of and life of Jesus. And so if there's any account that's told by multiple of the Gospels, this plan has helped me to be able to read it side by side by side. And I've noticed that the different gospels don't necessarily share all of the same details. And so by reading them side by side, I get a complete picture of what actually happened and the message that God is trying to bring across from sharing this account with us. And I think this particular passage that I studied today, I think it's really important to read this account from all the different gospels in order to get the true meaning, because I think a lot of doctrine has come out of this passage, and some of the things that have been misapplied, I think they've been misapplied because the message has been taught from one of the accounts instead of teaching it, having looked at all of them. And so it's not that the different accounts contradict one another. It's just that one of the accounts gives all of the details so that the intent of what Jesus is saying is clearer. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to look at two of the accounts because this situation is described in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I don't see John being one of the things I was told to read about, so I'm going to assume John probably didn't focus on this. But before I go any further, one thing I've been studying about the Gospels and why they were written and who wrote them is that I've learned that the Gospels were written for different audiences. Okay, I know one of them was written more for the Jews, and one of them was written more for the Gentiles. You know what I'm saying? So they were written for different audiences, and I've also read that the Gospels were written to convey a certain burden or message that Holy Spirit put on the person that was delivering the gospel. So an example of this is John. Like, the message that comes across loud and clear when you read the Gospel of John, I've read, is that he's trying to reveal the deity of Jesus, and he's trying to use different things that he experienced and saw, and that the Holy Spirit, is expressing through him to, highlight and to be a witness of the deity of Jesus. Okay. And so that's why he focuses on certain details of certain accounts, and why he has some accounts that he shares and other accounts he doesn't share, that some of the other gospels share, because their goal for writing their gospel is different. And Luke wrote his gospel because he felt like that there were so many different accounts out there, and he wrote it specifically to somebody, saying that since he had access to witnesses of the day, and he had an accurate understanding of everything that happened, he felt that, he should write one too, with all the accurate details for the person he was writing it for. Okay, just in case, I would imagine he came across something that Luke would have considered to be somewhat incomplete. And Luke was a doctor, so the way he shares detail, and the precise way that he approaches it, it highlights where he's coming from. Okay, and so, keeping that in mind, it's not that they contradict one another, or some of them are more accurate than others. Coming from a different perspective, when you look at everything side by side by side, as I said before, what I've noticed is that I get a more complete picture. Okay, so the account that I'm talking about is the account when Jesus comes down from the mountain after he had gone up there to pray with I think it was Peter, James, and John, and he was transfigured before them, and they saw him glorified. They said his face shone really brightly, and his clothes got really white, much whiter than any kind of white they've ever seen. It was beyond what white, they said, a launderer. I can't even pronounce that. Someone who washes clothes. It was beyond any kind of white that they could create. It was like light, basically. And so Jesus transformed in this way physically in front of them, and then it says they saw Moses and Elijah appear and talk to Jesus, and they were talking to Jesus. One of the, because this is in a couple of accounts, one of the accounts says they were talking to Jesus about his crucifixion, about his coming crucifixion. So, I didn't talk about this yesterday. This was from what I read yesterday. I didn't talk about this yesterday in the live. But what stood out to me as I was reading that is, wow. Number one, Moses is alive. Elijah is alive. They're interacting with Jesus. This gives us a lot of information about the hereafter. You know, we're not going into nothingness. We don't stop existing. There's a scripture that, Paul said to be absent from the body is to be present from the Lord, with the Lord. And Jesus himself said, God is not God of the dead. You keep calling him the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living, which one could infer from that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are all living, in that realm that we are not in. We're in this physical realm. They're in the spirit realm. You know what I'm saying? And so they appear like that, talking to Jesus, and Peter, James, and John see it, and more than what they see is their reaction to it that lets you know that something out of the ordinary happened to them. Okay. And so after having this experience, they come down off of the mountain. When they come down off of the mountain, the account that I'm going to address today is they see a crowd around the disciples, and the scribes are questioning the disciples, and then a situation arises with a father who approaches Jesus to ask if he'll cast a demon off of his son, because he had brought the son to the disciples with the same request, but the disciples were unsuccessful at casting the demon out. Okay, so before I read the passage, I want to call to your attention this. Okay, that a while back, Jesus had sent his disciples out 2 by 2, and he had given them authority to cast devils out of people. Okay, when they came back from that mission, they were very excited. Okay, and they were over the moon thrilled to let Jesus know it worked. It worked. We went out there and we cast demons out. They came out. Okay. And so this would have been why this father, I would imagine, he must have had some expectation that Jesus's disciples, would be successful at doing it. But for some reason, on this instance, they were not successful at doing it. Okay. So I'm going to read the passages side by side so that we can talk about, we can process what I noticed, that by reading one account and not the other, you might come to the conclusion that some demons are so powerful that even though you're a believer, and the Bible says that these signs will follow those that believe, that in my name they will cast out demons. Even though you're a believer and you believe this, by just reading one of the accounts, you might come to the conclusion that when the disciples asked Jesus why it didn't work, and Jesus, Jesus said the phrase, and these only come out by fasting and praying, you might come to the conclusion that some demons are so powerful that the only way you'll have the right amount of power to be able to cast those super duper demons out is if you first fast and pray. Okay? You can come to that conclusion by reading one of these accounts. Okay? But if you read both of the accounts side by side, okay, I'm telling you this up front, and then we'll look at it and I'll prove it to you. Okay? If you read both of the accounts up front, you'll see how even the second account is communicating the message that anything is possible. Everything is possible. All things are possible if the person that's asking for it believes God. If you believe God, nothing will be impossible for you, is the message Jesus is trying to convey. Okay? And fasting and praying is one of the tools that will help you deal with your unbelief. Okay? That's the message that Jesus is communicating. Okay? In both of the accounts. But if you read the one account where he doesn't talk about, the unbelief right after he talks about the fasting and praying, you might come to the conclusion that he's saying there are some super duper demons out there that only come out if you're fasted up and prayed up first. Now, personally, I have some problems with that, okay? Because God wants us to be ready in season and out of season. He expects us to be ready to minister as the need arises, okay? So it would be problematic if I had to be in a perpetual state of being fasted up. I could be prayed up, but to have been fasted up every time I come into contact with a situation where a demon is evident, I would have had to be fasted up in order to successfully cast a demon out. That would really affect my success rate. But that's just something that I was musing about, that, that setup can't be what the setup is if we're supposed to be effective ministers of the gospel. I mean, I suppose you could say you could just have a lifestyle of fasting and praying, but this really reads like, no, maybe you should have, some people could interpret this to mean, before you make that appointment, to pray for that person, because that demon is so powerful, you should have spent a week or a couple of days or whatever fasting and praying so that God would release to you the kind of power necessary to release that demon. Another reason why I don't think this is an accurate understanding of scripture is because we're told what the purpose of fasting and praying is. Okay? We're to understand the reason why people fast and pray is to bring your flesh under the obedience of where your spirit is leading, by taking authority over your flesh and saying, this is a basic need. Eating is a basic need that I have. Okay? I can use this as a tool to let my flesh know we're eating when I say we eat. We're not eating just because my stomach is growling, because I feel lightheaded, because it's mealtime, because every day at this time we eat. We're eating when I say it's time to eat. Okay? And every day that goes by that I'm still okay, even though I didn't eat, for the amount of amount of time I decided ahead of time that I'm going to fast, my flesh is going to understand who's in charge. Okay? And by doing that, what that does is it brings, the spirit to the forefront, and it kind of puts your senses in line so that you can get past your senses to understand what we've been talking about in the last few lives. Okay? That what's unseen is greater than what's seen. And I'm going to move according to what I know instead of according to what I see, what I hear, what I taste, and what I feel, which at times may be in opposition to the truth that God has put before me. Okay, so that's what the purpose of fasting is. We already have all of God's love. We already have all of God's favor. Forgiveness comes by accepting the work that Jesus did on the cross, the redemptive work that he did. He took our punishment for us. He bled for us, and God accepted that. And for all intents and purposes, you can think of it as you died with Christ for whatever you did already when he did. Okay? And so you don't need to fast now as penance or fast now to gain his favor for him to do anything for you. Jesus has already said in this passage, anything is possible. You can get anything from my Father. Okay? Assuming that your mind has been renewed and you flow with a mind like God. I certainly wouldn't, be expecting you to be asking him for something sinful. That wouldn't make sense. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay? But assuming that you have a heart toward God and a renewed mind, and you're flowing with his purposes, with his kind of character. Nothing is impossible if you believe. That's what we're talking about here. Okay? And so the fasting takes care of your carnal side so that you can position yourself to believe, and more importantly, to receive. Because that's really what the issue is. The issue isn't what I've noticed in my life. The issue isn't when is God going to give it to me. The issue is I keep turning in the wrong direction. He's standing over here handing it to me, but I'm turned this way. And so I'm having a hard time receiving it. So fasting repositions me so that I can receive it. So, if allowing all of the scripture to speak to bear in line, to help us to understand what Jesus is communicating through this passage, we can see that, okay, the fasting can't be, a manipulative type tool to kind of force God's hand to move for us. He already wants to move for us. He already wants the person that you're praying for to be well. He already wants to use you in that way. There's something else that's standing in the way of the success. Okay. And in this passage, Jesus says it's the unbelief. Okay. The unbelief is what's standing in the way, not the power of the enemy that's so much stronger than your power, because Jesus has already given us the authority, and he already gave the disciples the authority, and they already demonstrated that there were many times that they successfully used it. Okay. So let's look at the passage. Let's look at the passage. So I wanted you to have that frame of mind, as I go into it. So I'm going to read the one that, would lead you to think that there's a there are some super duper demons out there that will only come out if you fast and pray first. Okay. So I'm going to read Mark chapter 9, verse 16 through 29. So Mark chapter 9, verse 16 through 29 says, "And he asked the scribes, 'What question you with them?' And one of the multitude answered and said, 'Master, I have brought to you my son, which has a dumb spirit. And wherever he takes him, he tears him, and he foams, and gnashes with his teeth, and pines away. And I spoke to your disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not.' He answered him and said," listen to the subject of this conversation. "He answered him and said, 'O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him to me.' And they brought him to him. And when he saw him, immediately the spirit tore or convulsed him, made him start shaking him and, physically shaking him up, right? Tore him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed and foaming." So I've seen episodes like that. Kind of makes me think of a seizure, where like the person is shaking, and foamy spit is coming out of their mouth, and they're on the floor wiggling and stuff. I've seen that. Okay. This happened in front of Jesus, and for this kid, it was a demon. Okay. And it's in verse 20, it says, "And they brought him to him. And when he saw him, immediately a spirit tore him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed foaming. And he asked his father, 'How long is it ago since this came to him?' And he said, 'Of a child.'" So he asked his father, "How long has he been this way?" And the father said, "Since he was a child." Okay, verse 22. "And often it has cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Okay, so that's interesting. He's already experienced with the disciples that they prayed for him and they weren't able to cast him out. And now Jesus is standing in front of him, the teacher of these disciples. And because the disciples were unsuccessful, now this man is dealing with the possibility that, wow, maybe even Jesus won't be able to do anything for my son. Okay. So we see that he's struggling to believe that Jesus could do something for his son. He still has some hope because he's still asking. But he's saying that, well, if you can do, if, could you imagine? If this is Jesus, but I understand because these are his pupils, his proteges, maybe there's something special about his son, and maybe even Jesus won't be able to be successful. So we see that his negative experience with trying to get supernatural healing is now affecting his capacity to believe for it again, even though he has God in front of him. You understand? So I think that can speak to somebody right now. So let's see what Jesus responds. Okay. Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him that believes. Okay. So belief is what's on the table and is the issue at hand. It's almost like the man is coming to Jesus. They tried it. They tried to cast him out. It didn't work. I don't know if it can work to cast this demon out this way. Jesus redirects him and zones right into the issue at hand. You know, it is, maybe you have some kind of power, Jesus, and maybe there's something that you can do. If there's something that you can do, then maybe it can be done. But Jesus flips the whole thing around and says, no, if you believe, even the fact that the disciples were unsuccessful won't stop this thing from happening that you want. And he tells him, everything is possible. Everything is possible. Is your son getting rid of this demon a thing with a possibility? You know what I'm saying? Jesus is saying, yes, it's possible for your son to be delivered from this demon if you believe. Belief is what the issue is, not power. You understand? Lack of power is not the issue. Belief is the issue. So Jesus brings up the subject of belief. Okay? So he says to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him that believe. Okay? Verse 24 says, and immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help you my unbelief. Okay, so he's desperate. This is a man. You know what I'm saying? I would imagine culturally he wouldn't be weeping and crying if he could help it. You know what I'm saying? But he's crying. He's desperate. I do believe. I do believe. But if what you're saying is true and the issue is belief, help my unbelief. There must be unbelief. If you're saying the issue is belief and it hasn't happened, help my unbelief. Okay? And so verse 25, it says, when Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit and said to him, you dumb and deaf spirit, I charge you, come out of him and enter no more into him. Verse 26, it says, and the spirit cried and rent him sore and came out of him, and he was as one dead, insomuch that many said he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Now these details are not in the other account that I read. Him shaking of what happens as the demon is coming out. That part's not in the other account. Okay, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that wasn't the focus of the person that was sharing the story, because it doesn't change the meaning and the content of the story at all, and it doesn't contradict the other part of the story. Okay, it's just a more succinct telling in certain areas, if that makes any sense. Okay, verse 27, it says, but Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Verse 28, and when he was come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could not we cast him out? Verse 29, and he said to them, this kind can come forth by nothing but fasting and praying. So the question is, they asked him, why couldn't we cast him out? In this account, a portion of the conversation is left out that we get in the next account I'm going to read to you. And he gets right to the end of that, the point, you know, some only come out, this kind only comes forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. So if you just read it like that, you would think he's talking about this kind of demon only comes out by fasting and praying, if you don't consider the subject that he's been addressing throughout this whole entire passage, which is belief and unbelief, and the fact that nothing is impossible for you if you believe. Okay? And I already explained before that if we understand how fasting works, that would be an effective tool against unbelief. Okay? But we don't need it as a tool for power to defeat a devil, if that makes any sense, because we already have the authority to do it. Okay? So let's look at Matthew chapter 17, which makes everything clear because of the details that Matthew chooses to share about the incident. Okay? Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 through 21. Okay? It says, "And when they were come to the multitude, there came to him a certain man, kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is lunatic and sore vexed, for often he falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought you to his disciples, and they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation." So I stopped at perverse and looked that up. Okay? What is perverse? What is he accusing these people of being? What is he saying caused their lack of success to cast this devil out? What is their attitude? What is their position? Okay? He says they're faithless, and a great component of faith is belief. They're faithless, okay? And they're perverse. So what does perverse mean? So in the Greek, perverse is a word called diastrepho, and it's a verb. Okay, so he's accusing them of an action. So what action is he accusing them of? Okay, so perverse means the perverse that they're using in the Greek here, okay, is to distort. To distort. To turn aside from the right path, to oppose or plot against the saving purposes and plans of God. Okay? So I'm sitting here meditating on this, and I'm like, okay, what are they distorting? What are they turning aside from? What are they going in the wrong direction about? What are they opposing, which is the purpose of God? Okay? And then I realized, okay, well, the purpose of God is for this son to be delivered. It's for the son to be made whole. Okay? But they're not able to see and believe that they have the authority to do it. So God's plan of him being delivered and healed and set free is being distorted. It's being opposed. It's being, plotted against in a way. Okay? And that's validated if you go on to read what he says. It says, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I endure you?" Okay? Meaning he's not going to be with them for that much longer. Okay? He wants them to get this, because he's been with them for long enough and demonstrating it to them and teaching them. And we know that when they went out 2 by 2, they had a great degree of success with it. Okay, so he's really concerned about, them getting this. Just believe. Only believe. Okay? Don't believe in yourself. Don't believe in your belief. Only believe in God. Only believe that God has given you this authority and use it. Know who you are and know who God is. All things are possible for the person that believes God, because God's the one that's going to move the mountain. You're going to speak to the mountain, and he's going to back your words up and move that mountain for you. Your belief is in God, not yourself. Not how great your faith is. Not how well you've done. So now you think you have favor with God, and so that's why he's going to move for you. You know what I'm saying? Not because you spent all this time fasting and praying, and so now you know that's going to force God's hand to do something for you. It's to help you get past your senses to believe what God says is true. Okay? And so verse 18, it says, and Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that hour. So this account doesn't talk about how, it was like he was dead and people were like, oh no, you've killed him. And that whole commotion, and how Jesus had to take his hand and he was fine. You know what I'm saying? That was in the other account that we read. That was in Mark's account, but that wasn't in Matthew's account. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. That's why it's good to read this stuff side by side. Okay, but the point is, we both get to the same point. The boy was cured. Okay, verse 19. Oh, and another thing that's not in this account is everything about, Lord, help my belief. Lord, help my unbelief. That whole thing about unbelief, that whole conversation about unbelief that Jesus had with the Father was in the account with Mark, but it's not in the account with Matthew. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Again, different focus, but we're going to still talk about unbelief here with the disciples, and it's all going to come together. Okay, so verse 19 says, then the disciples came to Jesus apart and said, why could we not cast him out? And Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief. Why couldn't we cast the demon out? Jesus answered, you couldn't cast him out because of your unbelief. That's why you couldn't cast him out. That's the answer to the question. Why didn't he come out? Why weren't we successful this time? What happened? We cast demons out before. Why couldn't we cast this demon out? Because of your unbelief. Okay? Why would they have unbelief when they didn't have unbelief before? Okay? And I've heard a lot of messages about this. A lot of people have speculated about it. I speculated about it. I have a couple of thoughts about it. One thought I could have about it is, the same thing the demon did when Jesus was about to cast him out, was trying to cast him out, is probably the same thing the demon did when the disciples tried to cast him out. He starts shaking and foaming and looking threatening and quivering, and their senses. This looks really bad. This looks like a really strong demon. Maybe we don't have enough power to get rid of this one. You know what I'm saying? So Jesus is saying, you had a hard time getting past your senses. That's why you couldn't cast the demon out. Because he did all of that in front of Jesus, but yet he still had to come out. Okay? Jesus didn't back down. He refused to back down. Okay? And so, verse 20, Jesus says, because of your unbelief. He says, for verily I say to you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, remove here yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible for you. Okay, so all things are possible to them that believe. That conversation, that information is being conveyed right now to in Matthew's account. We heard that message in Mark's account when God was explaining it to the Father, but now the disciples are getting it, where he's explaining that as long as you believe, God will move for you. You'll be able to do impossible things. And he gave them an example of something that would be absolutely impossible. Speaking to a mountain and commanding it to fly into the sea. Jesus is saying even that would be possible if you believed it. Okay? And so, belief is the issue. Okay? So verse 21. However, this kind goes not out but by prayer and fasting. This kind of unbelief Belief is your issue. However, this kind of unbelief doesn't go out, doesn't leave you. You can't deal with this kind of unbelief except that you spend time praying and fasting, bringing your senses into subjection to what your spirit is, the direction that your spirit is going in. The truth of what God has said. Okay? Praying and fasting is the only thing that takes care of this kind of unbelief. Okay? So, to a certain extent, I would think that, for me as a believer, it would behoove me, just as a matter of my due diligence, to practice praying and to practice fasting, to train myself, to train my senses to get in line, to train my flesh to get in line, so that when I'm in a situation where I have to move by the Spirit, I can do it. That's the kind of preparation that should just be ongoing. That way I will be ready in season for whatever God throws my way. Okay? Have a lifestyle of praying and have a lifestyle of fasting. Okay? Which I think is largely missing. Now, you guys know, if you've been with me for a long time, if you've been following my channel for a long time, I have a series on fasting. I even documented a 21-day fast that I did. I documented the fast. I didn't record it in real time. I recorded it as I was going through it in real time, but I didn't release the videos until after the fast was over. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, for the people that are saying, oh, why did you, you're supposed to be doing this privately. I did it as as a tool that people who have questions about fasting, what fasting might be like, how it is on the day to day, or just as a tool to help people not to be afraid to fast, and also to share what I experienced while I was fasting. But it was done in secret because I recorded the stuff in my house and didn't release it until the fast was over. Then the after effects were made public. Another reason I did it that way too is I didn't want to give the whole world ammunition, to speak into my life as I was fasting. You know what I'm saying? And so one devil is enough trying to speak to you and bring you down while you're fasting. I'm not calling people devils, but you know what I mean. You don't want attacks and to make yourself vulnerable and to expose yourself, while you're fasting. But so that's still on my channel. Those are popular videos, my 21-day fast, and I've talked about fasting many times on this channel. And that's why I fast. Okay, for the purposes that we talked about in this live, to bring my flesh into subjection under my authority, and also to help me to understand and realize that I can deny myself. I can deny myself, and I should deny myself. I shouldn't just be driven to do things just because I have the impulse to do it, or the strong desire to do it, or the strong urge to do it. Okay? That I need to consider these impulses, that I need to consider these urges and make sure that they're lining up to God's will and purposes for me in the moment. And at times I can tell myself no. I always share that, back in the day when I was really struggling with sugar, I was really struggling with sugar, and also busy mom lifestyle. I was drinking a lot of lattes, and it just loaded and loaded and loaded with sugar. Anybody that really likes sugar knows that the sweeter you make things, the less sweet they seem to you, and you need to make them sweeter and sweeter and sweeter to be satisfied. So at my worst, I was drinking a disgustingly sweet blend of this dulce de leche latte that I would get at a place called Wawa here in Delaware, and I could not drive past a Wawa without stopping to get one. And I think at my worst, I was drinking 2 of the big, huge cups, the biggest cup you can get. What is it like? Is it 24, I don't know how, 24 ounce, it was about this big. No, I mean the biggest size, the super size. You know what I'm saying? And I would just be drinking that, and I felt like I couldn't go past a Wawa without getting one. And it wasn't until I was on a fast and had the impulse to get one, and because I was on a fast, I could discipline myself and say no, and I was fine. And every day driving past and not getting it for 21 days without getting it, and I was fine, and I was fine, and I was fine. When I'm not fasting, when the thought comes to my mind, I have to get one. I just can't. I can't not get one. I can't drive past without getting one. You know, you did it for 21 days. At least I have that testimony to be able to hold up and tell myself, no, that's not true. Okay. You might experience some discomfort for a few minutes that you didn't get it and you really wanted it, but that passes quickly. You'll be much happier to get home having not done that to your body, okay, than if you give in to that urge and that temptation. Okay. And I remember with one of those 21-day fasts, I remember, wow, a willingness to suffer. And I'm using this suffer, it is suffering, but for something some people might consider trivial. Like, I'm aware that people are suffering much greater and much more serious things than this example that I'm giving. But when you want something, you want a treat, or you want a sweet, or you want a food, or whatever it is that you want, when you deny yourself, that's not a very comfortable feeling. Okay. But during that fast, I realized that, wow, if I'm willing to suffer, if I'm willing to endure um, that uncomfortable feeling, if I know how to press through and push through that uncomfortable feeling, man, that opens so many doors in so many areas of my life to help me to achieve so many goals that I want to achieve. The thing that usually holds me back is not being able to push through that discomfort. And then when I fail, then I'm beating myself up because I couldn't push through. And then I give myself hope by saying, okay, well, tomorrow I'll try to push through. And then when tomorrow comes, I still can't push through. Okay. But the fact of the matter is if you just push through and you keep pushing through, it gets easier and easier and easier until the thing is not even a temptation anymore. Okay. On my channel, you'll also notice that I did intermittent fasting for a while. I changed up my diet. Started to eat a really low carb diet for a while. That meant I had to take sugar out of my diet. And when I took sugar out of my diet, my taste buds changed completely. I don't even like sweet coffee like that now. I don't even like sweet coffee. I remember the victory for me was the day I ordered the same latte and I couldn't drink it because it was it was just so disgusting. It was so sweet. It was so sweet to me that I couldn't even drink it. And I sat there marveling, remembering and marveling at all the times I thought I couldn't drive past a Wawa unless I bought one of those things. It's powerful, you guys. It's powerful. I hear my husband. I hear somebody coming down the stairs. I moved the studio, but there's no place where we're in the place where I would hope would be out of the way, but you guys are really well accustomed to me being interrupted during my lives and my recording. So the location that we're at now, you might hear someone open the door and come down the stairs, but they won't be on camera unless they decide to pop in to the frame. So just bear with me with that. We're working on it, you guys. We're working through it. But I'm happy with the setup so far. So I'm excited. There will be new things coming. I'm working on a business that I want to launch, and some professional videos I want to release, really trying to help people and empower people, but also build my resources also, you know. So anyway, these lives will of course continue, but I will also be trying to build some wealth with some of the gifts and talents that the Lord has given me. But I hope this was a blessing to you guys. I'm looking at the chat and I don't see any comments on the chat. Uh, but this is your time. If you want to say something, let me know where you're watching from. You know, thank you so much for being with me. I do see that there are people with me on the live right now. Thank you so much for watching. Give me a thumbs up if it was a blessing to you. Share it if it was a blessing and you think it might be a blessing to somebody else. But I will leave you guys at that. I hope that you have a blessed day. Be blessed.